Hi, my name is Anita Dixon. I am an independent Stampin' Up! Demonstrator in Wyoming, Minnesota. Thank you for joining me. In my last video, I shared some cards, a variety of cards made with the basic border dies. In this video, I want to focus on just one die, and that's this V-shaped die. In this video, I want to share with you some cards, tips, and show you how I made this card. Let's begin with some of the sample cards. These two cards I showed in my last video. If you missed it, you'll be able to see them now. I started with a card base of 8.5 by 5.5, and I laid the die onto the white cardstock and died just once. I attached a piece of black cardstock to the back. A very simple and easy card to make. The leftover piece I used to make this card. I used the white and then a piece of black cardstock that I ran through the die cutting machine as well with the same die, and then I layered both onto a piece of designer paper. The next card goes in a different direction. We've got it horizontally, and instead of lining it up at the center point, I laid it onto my white cardstock and pushed it over a little bit to the left to give it a little different look. I also added a layer of black die cutted paper behind, and then a piece of designer paper. In this card, I've used the Sending Smiles bundle, and that can be found on page 14 of the Idea Book and Catalog. The next card is one of my favorite. This card is made with very vanilla cardstock, 8.5 by 5.5, and scored at 4 1/4. I laid the die pretty close to the edge of the cardstock, about maybe 5/8 of an inch, and then die cut once. I added a piece of Evening Evergreen cardstock to the back, and then the piece that was left over, I trimmed about 1/4 of an inch, and then attached it to the Evening Evergreen cardstock. I wanted to leave just a little bit of the Evening Evergreen cardstock showing through. The bundle that I used on this card is called Hello Harvest. It consists of a stamp set called Hello Harvest and rustic pumpkin dies. They can be found on page 50 of the mini catalog. I love how these pumpkins not only die cut, but they emboss at the same time. Aren't they gorgeous? And I used the Evening Evergreen ink for the greeting and the festive pearls for the accent. There are 4 different colors. 1, 2, 3, 4, yes. The next card, I used the die to create a banner. This die and the stamp, or I should say the stamp set and the designer paper and the dies are from the Happiness Abounds bundle. The cardstock here is Highland Heather, and I used the time-worn embossing folder to add a little dimension to this piece. The dots are the Glossy Dots assortment. And the next card is going to be this one. This is my make and take today, and the designer paper is the Rustic Harvest designer paper found on page 50 of the mini catalog. So the materials that we're going to need for this card are going to be a piece of Cajun Craze cardstock that measures 8.5 by 5.5, and I've scored it at 4 1/4. We'll use a piece of white cardstock for the inside of the card, and that measures 5 1/4 by 4. A piece of black cardstock, basic black, it measures 4 1/4 by 3 1/4, and a piece of designer paper that measures 4 1/4 by 3. I'm going to start with the embossing on this card, and as you can see, the spray of leaves that are on the left-hand side of the page. The embossing folder that I used is called Leaf Fall 3D Embossing Folder. It is absolutely gorgeous. And to create this card, I'm going to take the cardstock and lay it into the front of my card face down. I'm going to line it up with the line on the left-hand side and my crease line at the top, and then fold. The sandwich that I'm going to use on this card is the basic plate number 1 and number 4 for a 3D embossing folder. And normally I would put a folder into the embossing machine with the fold facing the machine. However, because this card lays a different direction, I'm going to put it in this way, and I'm going to be very careful that everything is lined up on both the right and the left side, and then crank it through. Okay, put that aside because we won't need that anymore. Isn't that gorgeous? And the reason that I placed it in the folder that direction was because there's a spray of leaf on the left side. The right side, there isn't anything. And for my card, I don't care if there isn't anything there because it's covered up with the designer paper. So I'll fold this in half and we'll put this aside. The next thing we want to do is to die cut the designer paper. Now, if you have a directional paper, like the pumpkins were on here, you want to be careful how you lay your die onto the paper. I'm going to start with a piece of grid paper that's Stampin' Up! Supplies for us, and I want the pumpkin this direction, so I'm going to turn it this way. My paper is 4 1/4. I'm going to use this number 4 as my center point and lay it on here. And I know that a half would be 2 1/8, so I'm going to move this over like this. And then I'm going to take the die and lay it on here. I want to make sure that it is below the top edge of the card. And this. And the center point is just kind of eyeballing below the 4 there. I like to use some of this tape. I get it from Amazon, and it's called Post-it Labeling and Cover-Up Tape. I like it because it's small, it's sticky, but it's removable. It works great for me. So I'm going to take this and put it into the die cutting machine. And I'm going to use base plate number 1 again, and number 2, and then 2 plates, number 3 on the bottom, and a number 3 on the top. And because my paper is small, I can put it in this direction. If I were putting it in this direction, because it is pretty close to the edges, I want to be very careful that my tape is attached firmly so that it doesn't move. So let's cover that and run that through. So I'm going to very gently remove this, and this die leaves stitching on both sides. It left stitching on this piece, and it left stitching on this piece. So I could use this on another card. I'm just going to put that aside. And then we're ready to die cut our black piece. Now I don't really need the grid paper any longer, but I'm going to lay my designer paper on top of the black paper, and I'm going to push it up a little bit, about as far as I would like it to be, to show through this side. And I'll show you that in a minute here. I'm going to take my die and I'm going to butt it up next to the previous die, the stitching that you can see in the designer paper. I don't want it over the top. I want it next to it. That way it will be lined up once you attach it to your paper. So let's run that through the die cutting machine as well. So we've got the black, and it has the stitching on it. And then I'm going to remove this. And the black here also has a stitching. If you can think of something to do with that. And another card. Keep that for later. That. So now I'm going to take this and butt it up at the bottom. So what I had at the bottom is now at the top. And if I didn't want this much space, I could always move this up and trim off as much as I would like. So let's bring our card base back in here, and it's ready to assemble. So I'm going to use some of our liquid multi-purpose glue and glue this piece. I love this glue. It doesn't take much to adhere it. And I'm going to just very gently do this. And if it doesn't line up, I can easily remove it as long as I haven't pressed down too hard. That looks good. Now I can press down on it. I love this for a fall card. Now we're going to add a little bit of glue to this one. I'm using glue because my greeting is going to be attached with dimensionals. And this way it won't make my envelope too thick when I mail it. Perfect. Now the greeting that I'm using on this card is from a stamp set that has become one of my favorites. It's called Go To Greetings. It has happy birthday, thinking of you, just a note, and in not just one font, but larger and smaller and different fonts. Well, there's also a hello and a thank you and just a note. The die that I used on this greeting is from the Stylish Shapes. I used this one right here. This gets used a lot. I've already stamped my greeting, the thinking of you, and I'm going to attach it to this card with dimensionals. I'm using some large ones. I think 3 dimensionals will work. And I'm going to press in the middle and pull. That makes it a lot easier to remove those dimensional backs. And then we'll attach it to the front of the card, about like this. And then we need a little bit of bling, so I'm going to use some of our rhinestones and my take your pick tool. I think I'll use the medium size. Whoops, it went flying on me. Oh, gotta remove that back end. If I can get that off of there. Well, I think that one is stuck there. Let's try this one. And how about that one? That worked a little better. Okay, now all we have left to do is to insert our white piece on the inside of the card, and we're ready to address our card and mail it off. So thank you so much for watching my video. I hope it gives you inspiration. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. If you have any comments or questions, please leave them below. I'd love to hear from you. Please stay tuned next week for some more ideas with the basic border dies. Have a great stamping day. Bye-bye.